Hello, family. This is the Empress, and welcome back to the channel, The Empress Speaks. Tonight, we're going to start our segment on healing generational trauma. This is going to be our very first episode. The title is The Cost of Unhealed Love. The Cost of Unhealed Love. And we're going to be taking this from, you know, some of the events that have happened or transpired lately in the court system with Latoshia Daniels and her case. And we're going to, just take a look at that and kind of talk through some pieces of how this shows up, and some of the things that were obviously missed in this particular case, some things that we can perhaps even relate to. We're going to use this as a turning point, a talking point, and a launch pad for growth, spiritual growth, and healing. Now, we're going to go over a few facts about Latoshia Daniels' early life and relationships with her family, including different dynamics and aspects between her and her stepfather. Daniels testified that her stepfather, who's a pastor, physically abused her mother, and she witnessed domestic violation in the home. Domestic violence in the home. And so this is quite a traumatic experience. I'm sure normalized things for her. If this was the first display of violence and probably the primary display of emotion, and definitely having a serious imprint on what that male-female dynamic pattern should be like for her. Okay, she stated that she was forced to present a normal facade in public despite what was happening at home as a young girl. She described growing up in a home where her stepfather, a respected minister, beat her mother while maintaining a facade of a perfect family. Many of you can relate to that. Domestic violence is not something that's unfamiliar in most of the homes across America, especially in Black America, or in general in homes where there is a lot of religious dogma. At age 17, Latoshia Daniels became pregnant and was required by her father or parents to marry her boyfriend. We call that a shotgun wedding. I didn't even know they still did that. I thought that went out way in the 70s. But that marriage later broke down when she discovered infidelity. She attempted suicide after the divorce from that marriage, and later experienced an emotionally unfulfilling second marriage. So, with that, we're going to start to begin a sacred conversation about healing generational trauma, the cost of unhealed love. This isn't about therapy or therapy talk or theory, okay? This is about lineage, about how stories, silence, and survival patterns pass through bloodlines until someone decides to transmute them. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that someone is me. And maybe we'll discover that we've been carrying the same ancestral song as a collective community. Generational trauma is pain that outlives the moment it was created. Let me repeat that. Generational trauma is pain that outlives the moment it was created. It's your grandmother's heartbreak that's still echoing in your chest. Your father's fear of failure sitting on your shoulders every time you try to rest. Science calls it epigenetic imprinting. The idea that severe stress can literally mark our DNA. That is very huge. Stress can have a mark, an imprint on your DNA. Spirituality calls it ancestral memory. The vibration of experiences pass through energy fields and family systems. This is what we pass on. Trauma that we pass on to our next generation. For me, on a personal level, I experienced a young pregnancy. I wasn't a teenager. I was, my first year, second year in college. So I was 19 when I conceived my oldest son and 20 when I birthed him. But I had a lot of feelings of insecurities, being overwhelmed, not feeling confident, depression, even suicidal thoughts. And this became a genetic imprint that I passed on to my son. But for us, modern healers, we call it a message, waiting for translation. We have to be able to name our trauma in order to heal it. Trauma isn't just pain, it's an unspoken language of protection that's outlived its purpose. I'm going to toggle back and refer to the Latoshia Daniels case, and I've got some notes here. Probably needed my glasses. But implications for generational trauma and healing. Okay, witnessing domestic violence, pastor, father figure. For those of you who grew up in a household like that may be able to relate to this, or you have listened to a lot of the crime television updates, YouTube updates, Instagram updates on her case, because I think she was sentenced here recently. So there's been a lot of update on the case, and I think this actually took place in 2019. Growing up with a father figure in a position of spiritual authority, but this individual engaged in abusive behavior, and that may lead to deep internal conflict. Faith versus fear, authority versus truth. He was in a position of authority. Ironically, a pastor of a church, someone who's supposed to be a pillar of a community, also a counselor, a lay counselor, a therapist, facading that everything is fine. The requirement to hide the trauma and maintain perfect family image is a container of suppression. Emotion sits unprocessed and then seeks expression later in life. So we talked a little bit earlier about being containers for emotional suppression or trauma. It's a lot of us are containers for it. What we're learning through this series, this segment, through my YouTube, through my works, is to be able to transmute that container of emotional suppression into healing and purpose. Okay. But you have to define it. You have to name it. You have to start to deal with it. And so creating a facade only puts you in that survival mode where, okay, I've got to put my big girl panties on and keep going with it and going with the flow and pretending that everything is okay. So that led her to get into that pretend modality, suppressing her emotions over and over and over again till I'm pretty sure it did culminate. Adolescent pregnancy and forced marriage. This can also represent a break in autonomy, magnification of abandonment issues, worth wound, and may see trauma bonding patterns, which we see develop in the second marriage and subsequently in her cheating with Brodus, and ultimately taking his life in pow on his spouse as well. Submitting to relationships from a place of woundedness rather than choice. I do believe she had a strong leg and defense to stand on with her brokenheartedness and the manipulation, mental and spiritual manipulation that she entangled herself in, and he held the keys to over her head. Suicidal ideations and failed subsequent marriage, which we just talked about. And these highlight unhealed emotional wounds, unmet needs for validation and safety. Women often want to, get over one man with another man. And the problem with that, or a couple problems with that, is that you are unhealed. So when an unhealed woman jumps from one relationship, or a man jumps from one relationship to the other, that creates more of a problem because you're going in with the same dirty behaviors. It's like, putting on new clothes and not having taken a shower, and you are musty as a billy goat, or stinking, or just filthy, right? So you have to, deal with the trauma, and work on your healing and transmutation before you go into a relationship, or try to enter into a relationship feeling unworthy, unhealed, unloved, unnatural. Spiritual and ministerial context. We take a look at that. The fact that her upbringing included a minister father, and her later relationship involved a pastor, adds to the dimension of spiritual authority, secrecy, and relational power imbalance. She had shared undoubtedly some of her deepest secrets, and he held those secrets and used that against her. He manipulated her spiritually and emotionally. All right, so we're going to move on to epigenetic imprinting, the idea that severe stress can literally mark our DNA, okay, and how those vibrations are passed on. In listening to some of the testimony in the trial, you hear Latoshia saying, why does this keep happening to me? Why, basically, why does this person keep doing me like this? Why do I keep getting used? And you will continue to repeat a cycle of abuse until you learn to understand the triggers, understand what the universe is trying to tell you about your unhealed wound. The lesson will keep showing up until the student is ready to master the lesson, deal with the shadow, and work through those things that are necessary to heal that trauma, or to identify it, to name it, to take it out of the container and transmute it. So recognizing that pattern is a big piece. Here's how we can recognize generational trauma operating in our lives. Recurring emotional triggers with no clear origin. It's like, even if it's a new relationship, you are experiencing the same problem, over and over again, where there is a lack of, that individual doesn't show you tenderness, nurturing. They don't express that emotional safety with you, or give you an inclination that they love you. Like she said after sex with this individual during the testimony with Brodus, that there was no tenderness. It was harsh, and he didn't hold her, and he just, just went through savage acts of sexual intercourse where there's just no tenderness. You see that happening over and over again, instances where it was glaring that this man did not value you. He did not appreciate you. You were never enough, or he made you feel like you weren't enough. Overreaction or underreaction to conflict. Feeling responsible for everyone's emotions, carrying on trauma that is not yours, or emotions that is not yours to bear. Constant fear of abandonment. Even in stable relationships, you become self-sabotaging because you're just so used to people walking out on you. You fear, you overperform, or you overcompensate. You give them everything that you think that they could ever dream of having, and just to keep them in your corner, just to keep them satisfied with you. And then, of course, that leads to chronic burnout from proving your worth. These patterns are not just personality flaws. They're survival codes, right? And generations before us, our mothers and grandmothers, they lived by these codes. And awareness is the first act of rebellion against inheriting suffering. You have to understand that this is not natural to feel this way, and to carry on these burdens, and to not have someone pour into you. That's not natural. To not be cared for. And it's great to be a nurturer as women, parents, especially mothers. We want to nurture those that we love. That's probably some of y'all's emotional or love languages, acts of service and love. For me, it is. But I have to be very careful against over nurturing or to empty myself, deplete myself, or depleting myself. If you ever said something like, I don't know why I'm like this, then that's your lineage speaking. And awareness invites compassion, not blame. If you don't know why you're like this, sit down with that, sit with that, and explore that feeling. There has to be a reason for it. There has to be something that was in your genetic imprint or epigenetic imprint, something you saw as a child that was a normalized behavior, but it was very unhealthy. It was something that should never have been normalized, whether it had been abuse or anything like that. Sexual assault, abuse, physical abuse, mental, financial, all of the things. The cost of unhealed love. Love that isn't healed becomes control. It becomes silence. It becomes resentment, anger, hatred. And it appears to always be wrapped up in sacrifice. Families often teach us that love equals endurance, that to be loyal is to carry pain without complaint. And I call BS on that. Unhealed love costs generations their ability to receive freely. It's the mother who gives until she disappears. The son who seeks approval he'll never recognize. The daughter who becomes the therapist in every relationship. Speaking of which, not that there is any not that there has to necessarily be a coincidence, but Latoshia Daniels was a therapist. She had attained and earned a PhD. So she really wanted to try, I believe, to heal herself as well as to try to heal others. Okay. And I think she dedicated her life to doing that, up until it just became too much for her to bear. We look at the early childhood violence behind the veil, witnessing the domestic violence from the stepfather who was also a pastor. So that pattern shows up as dual identity in the home. Holiness in public, hell in private or at home. And the emotional imprint led to confusion about love and authority. Confusion about love and authority. During her testimony, she said she went to her pastor, Brodus, to talk about her marriage, her second marriage ending, and get the spiritual counseling and support that she needed. And after the conversation, after pouring her heart out, he kissed her passionately, and that was the first time they had sex. I'm assuming that it was on the church grounds or in his office or something like that. So there you can see where that confusion about love and authority comes into play. Belief form. Power and control are normal in relationships. Power and control are normal in relationships. So that normalized behavior, that controlling, over-controlling mechanism in which, during the testimony, Latoshia mentioned Brodus owed the church about $2,000. And she paid that debt all but $200 or $300, and he was very upset with her. And she mentioned that in the testimony because he wanted her to pay it all. And I'm sure there was a whole lot of financial manipulation as well. The generational echo is this is common in lineages where women were taught to endure silently and prioritize appearances over safety. Authenticity over appearance. The courage to speak truth even when it disrupts image-based safety. What family truths were you told to never speak out loud? And how has silence shaped your idea of love? Back in the day, especially in the South, families just stayed together regardless, of how toxic the relationship was. They stayed together forever and ever. You know, my mother and father had a toxic relationship, if you will. There were good times, but there were bad times in which my father was abusive, emotionally, financially, and physically. And it took my mother did leave, but it took her a very long time to walk away. And I'm sure I know that had an imprint on how I dealt with relationships and you know, what showed up in my marriages and divorces, you know, subsequent divorces. So you know, like I said earlier, the universe will keep presenting a challenge to you or a test to you until you are ready for the answer key, until you are ready to move on, until you are ready to master that challenge. It will continue to show you karmic relationships until you are ready to end that karmic cycle. All right, let me move on here. Let's see. Healing generational trauma is not about exposing who hurt us. Okay, I want to repeat that. Healing generational trauma is not about exposing who hurt us. It's about ending the unpaid emotional debts we inherited. It doesn't matter who hurt you. You know, true enough, we feel that those who should have loved us and protect us ought not ever be the ones to hurt us. But hurt is hurt, regardless of whether or not it comes from a failed marriage, a spouse, or a mother or father. You are not betraying your family by healing. You are honoring them by ending the cycle. You know, sometimes putting a name to the person who hurt you, revealing who they are, helps you to identify the trauma, helps you to open the container and release the suppression from that container and transmute that energy. Okay, speaking of transmuting energy, the pillars, 3 pillars of healing, we're going to talk about that. Awareness, regulation, and transmutation. Awareness is naming what was never named. You've got to be able to name your trauma in order to heal it. And that means confronting it and facing it, no matter how deep you have suppressed that emotion. Regulation, learning to soothe the nervous system that grew up in survival, that made or normalized all those abnormal behaviors in the home. And transmutation, and that's the alchemy of converting pain into wisdom, art, service, or purpose. Awareness asks, what happened? Am I strong enough to face what happened to me? Can I talk about it with a therapist or my tribe or my spiritual team or my family? Regulation asks, how does it live in my body? How does it show up in my relationships? Transmutation asks, how can I turn this into something sacred so that I heal the generations that come after me, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, or my children? You cannot heal what you won't allow yourself to feel. You cannot feel safely until you regulate. And you cannot transmute until you accept that your pain has purpose. Some of your pain triggers you into self-awareness, self-confidence, into your Empress or Emperor stage, your boss stage, your ending of a karmic cycle, whatever. Your pain has a purpose. Remember, in all of this, you're not healing alone. When one woman heals, 7 generations breathe easier. When one woman heals, 7 generations breathe easier. When I think about Latoshia Daniels, her story could have easily been any of ours. For those of you who have experienced heartache, unrequited love, or you've just been a fool in love, or you've been whipped, or whatever they want to say. We've all experienced it at some point at some time. And how we dealt with it had a direct correlation to where we were in our healing. And, my mother used to say it's terrible to be an old fool. As we grow in age, we think that emotional intelligence will improve with age, and that's not always the case. It just depends on where we are in our state of healing our trauma when we, and what age we were when we first experienced it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on another segment. But in closing and reflection, I will want you to kind of inhale for all who came before you. Exhale for all who will come after you. Repeat after me. I am the breaker of all cycles. I am the restorer of love. I am the ancestor they dreamed would heal. Thank you for joining me on this segment of the Empress Speaks, Healing Generational Trauma, Episode 1. Please let me know if this resonates with you. Share, comment, come back. Your commentary means everything to me. I want to know where you are with your healing, and if you've experienced any generational trauma, suppressed emotion, any of those things, and how did you deal with it? How did it show up in your life? How did you name it? How did you transmute it? How long were you a container for it? All of those things, because we are healing together, we are rising together, we are defining our purpose together, and most importantly, we are transmuting together. Thank you all for listening. I wish you love, peace, abundance, and light.